Is oil the answer to Uganda's economic growth? After 2 decades of development, one of the world's longest oil pipelines is set to open within the year, taking crude oil from Uganda's Lake Albert to the Tanzanian coast. But how much will Ugandans profit from extraction? And does it risk serious environmental and human costs? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Uganda's oil. At just under 1,500 kilometers, the East African crude oil pipeline is almost the longest in the world. But technically, it is set to do exactly what Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni pledged not to. With money from France's Total, China, and others, the pipeline will take crude oil out of Uganda for export and refining, at least until a local refinery is built. But some doubt Ugandans will see the benefits of their reserves, believing environmental degradation and human rights violations could cancel any upside. So will oil really grow Uganda's economy for the masses, especially if most of the world is hoping to phase oil out? Here's a look.
Uganda and Tanzania called it a victory after signing the massive oil pipeline project back in 2020. The 1,440-kilometre-long project will pump Uganda's oil to the Indian Ocean port of Tanga. Uganda discovered oil nearly 20 years ago, but it wasn't until 2022 that a consortium of France's Total Energies and China's National Offshore Oil Corporation invested $10 billion to develop the country's resources. It's been welcomed as a blessing. One of the poorest nations in the world could be oil-rich and create tens of thousands of jobs. But financing issues, climate campaigns, and court cases have delayed the project. Uganda has already started building a refinery and an oil drilling program, but environmental concerns are growing as the plan progresses. The pipeline runs through farmland, and drilling is affecting wildlife and ecosystems.
Stop! Eco!
Since it was first announced, climate activists have protested the project in France, the UK, and Germany. But Ugandans who oppose the project are facing assault, arrest, and prosecution.
I have a strong conviction towards whatever that I'll be doing, that eventually we shall have the win. Never at any point do I feel that I have to give up. Of course, sometimes you get frustrated as a person.
Climate groups have also pressured financiers and banks not to fund the project. And to an extent, that worked. Most large Western banks refused to commit, putting the project's fate in doubt. But it's already ruined some people's livelihoods. Those who lost their homes through expropriation for the construction have received little compensation. Human Rights Watch says the project will ultimately displace over 100,000 people.
There is nobody in here, Bunyoro here. There is nobody who is in a position according to any activity concerning oil. Nobody is happy. Because what I told you that they were forcing people to sign, you sign here. If it's 1 million, you sign and take your 1 million. If not, you find out or you could go. So people are not happy.
Activists have also sued Total Energies for violating property rights and failing to protect the environment. They see the project as an example of corporate colonialism and say that while Total Energies is reaping the benefit, Ugandans will continue to suffer. President Yoweri Museveni's government says it will bring much-needed economic growth and development. And without adequate green transition funding from wealthy countries, Uganda sees few possibilities other than investing in oil. For some, the pipeline is a miracle in the making. But with the threat of environmental damage, concerns over exploitation and lost livelihoods, could Uganda's oil turn into a curse?
So where will Uganda's oil take its economy and its people? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Kampala, Chief Executive Officer of Africa Institute for Energy Governance, Dickens Kamugisha, and from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, economist and visiting fellow in the Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations, Sarah Logan. Thank you both so much for being with us. Dickens, let's begin with you in Kampala. The pipeline, correct me if I'm wrong, it should be in operation next year. The refinery should be online, from what we're hearing, by 2027. So will Ugandans, particularly those living near the extraction and refinery sites, see real upside in economic growth in the coming years?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a question that many people have been asking, and indeed, both the government and the companies have been telling Ugandans that now with the discovery of oil, you are going to be in very good things. You'll get jobs, you'll get health services, education, you'll get clean water, and things are going to change. But I tell you, many of the citizens have realized that all those things were just lies. First and foremost, thousands of people have been displaced from their land without fair compensation. And you know, most of our people, over 90% survive on land. Once you lose your land, you've lost your life. So any project that makes people landless, depriving people of their livelihood is not a project. So that question about whether oil is going to make people, whether the pipeline is built, whether the refinery is built is going to make people better, it is already proving that it is going to be a disaster.
So why do it, Dickens? Why do it? Who is really benefiting?
Of course, for me, I believe the big companies like Total Energies that are already in this sector, many taxes have been paid in capital gains tax. That money is nowhere in government. We see the companies, for them, they are looking at profits that will be made. They are not looking at the number of people, young people who are failing to continue with school because their families have been disrupted. They are not looking at our forests, our wetlands, our wildlife that are being affected. So we believe they have a hidden agenda to make money at the expense of the citizens. As we speak today, since 2012, when Total Energies and CNOOC, the big companies, came to Uganda, the national debt of our country has moved from $4 billion US. To date, it is $25 billion US. And remember, this debt is going to be paid by both the poor and the rich, the young and the old. So we believe that, these oil projects they are talking about, maybe the companies and the big people in the government are the ones that are looking at the benefits, but the citizens of Uganda are actually not getting anything.
Okay.
And I don't think that even when the refinery and the pipeline are built, that they are going to be better. It's not going to be.
Okay, Sarah, I mean, that sounds pretty dire. Have you seen anything on the other side that actually is bringing benefit, especially to average Ugandans living in the countryside near these sites?
So I think there are potential benefits. I mean, I think what Dickens highlights is that these benefits are not carrying across yet to Ugandans, and potentially also not to Tanzanians on the side of the pipeline development. But in theory, oil development should bring in revenues that could be used in ways that really improve the livelihoods of people in terms of investments in infrastructure development, but also health and education. But it really comes down to a question of government's commitment to use revenues very, very prudently, with a lot of scrutiny, with a lot of transparency, and really in the public interest. And it seems that that is what is not happening in Uganda, that it's not oil development necessarily that is the problem, but the responsibility around government in making sure that it benefits the people is falling way short.
Right. I mean, in theory, of course, this should work. If there's, a revenue stream coming in, it should translate to the people. But it doesn't seem to be. Dickens?
Maybe something that I need to add. When we talk about the oil in Uganda and the pipeline that is being built between Uganda and Tanzania, we are looking at the future. But as we speak, huge impacts have already happened. Over 100,000 people in Uganda are being displaced by the pipeline. Over 7,000 people, including 1,500 children, were displaced by the refinery process. all these people, their survival, their future has been compromised. So even when we say, oh, in the future, maybe things are going to work, the governance question in our countries, the institutions, the legal processes, all those are very weak, and I don't think you can have a sector like oil benefiting people where the governance is not good. Today, most of us, civil society and community leaders who speak out, you are harassed, you are intimidated, you are arrested, you are put in prison, and they will never try you. So all these are signs that there is impunity, and I don't think that there is anyone who is going to expect to benefit from oil where there is impunity. So for me, whether it is theory, whether it is practical, the signs are there that Ugandans, even Tanzanians, are not likely to benefit.
Understood. I mean, Sarah, yeah, the governance has to be good. I saw you shake your head in agreement when he said that, nod your head rather. So in the meantime, if the governance is questionable around how the profits are used and distributed, what happens in the meantime to the sectors that do matter most to people, including agriculture and fishing? Will those be compromised, and will the area be compromised ecologically to cause even greater damage to communities?
So they're definitely environmental impacts, but they're potential economic impacts also of poor financial management. The biggest of these is obviously the Dutch disease, where essentially the Ugandan currency will appreciate in value and essentially make the exports of non-oil sectors, so agriculture, manufacturing, even services, make them more expensive than they are in regional and international countries. And over time, this leads to lower demand for these more expensive products and less investment in those sectors. And at the very extreme, could actually lead to the collapse of non-oil sectors. This is where we see the very extreme version of the Dutch disease, where agriculture, manufacturing, and services are very, very deeply affected in the country. And so there really is a need to guard against the Dutch disease, and doing this really requires, a sovereign wealth fund of sorts where you can control the amount of money that is being released into the economy. You can make sure that you are protecting the value of your local currency. Environmentally,
do you see that happening in the case of Uganda?
So I know that there is a form of sovereign wealth fund that has been created. It doesn't have the full remit of what they normally do. There has been some desire to manage finances more responsibly in the longer term, but it seems to be lacking some very clear, important parts. And more broadly, there needs to be very clear political commitment to prudent financial management, and it's not clear that that is in place in Uganda either. And the problem is, once revenues start flowing in, if the framework is not in place, if the spending rules are not in place, if all loopholes to reduce corruption and financial misappropriation are not in place, it starts becoming very, very messy.
And it becomes the typical curse of natural resources that we've seen in too many countries. But Dickens, let me ask you, is it adding, or will it, do you think, add some value to Uganda's economy, even if just on the margins, by providing jobs and providing training to people? Or will workers just have to be imported? Because a lot of this work requires technical skill and experience that will really have to be brought by the masses, starting from the most basic level.
Maybe the first thing we need to take into account is at what cost. Even the environmental and social impact assessments that were done, and one of the things that we are challenging at the East African Court of Justice, and the case we filed in 2020, was to actually ensure that the East Africans, all of those who are affected, for example, the people who depend on Lake Victoria, they should participate and get to understand the mechanisms, the strategies that the companies and the governments are going to put in place to mitigate the impacts of oil activities, the eco project on Lake Victoria and all other ecosystems. And unfortunately, since 2020, today is 2025, the courts and the judicial process is delaying. So there are no even guarantees that we have mitigation plans to ensure that those impacts are mitigated or avoided. Secondly, when we look at the way things are being done in the country called Uganda, where you have companies that are not respecting the rights of the people who own land. And yet, these same people are the ones supposed to protect the pipeline. This pipeline is going to be passing through very areas that are not guarded, areas that are not protected. You have harassed the people. How are you going to protect the pipeline of 1,443 kilometers? How? And if that infrastructure is not going to be supported and protected and loved by the people, how are you going to manage? We've seen in Africa that the governance question, because people feel aggrieved, people don't feel owning the project, these projects have become a ghost. They become actually anti-people, and the people fight back. And you can look at all the countries that are producing oil in Africa. So yes, oil may bring money. In Uganda, it has so far brought around $1.1 billion in capital gains tax. We have a law that provides for a petroleum fund where money invested or collected in that petroleum fund should not be used in consumptive areas. It should be invested in areas that generate more money. As we speak, there is no single coin in that petroleum fund. So already we have started on a wrong note.
Okay, let me ask Sarah, though. I mean, is all of this kind of collectively a bit too short-sighted? You know, just based on the fact that many say the economic lifespan of oil is now just limited because everyone is moving into green energy, and it's not worth risking environmental issues and sinking so much investment into a commodity that will have less and less value over time.
Yes, I mean, it is a very good point. We are going to see a reduction in demand for oil in the future, and that will come with a decline in the price of oil too. And so, you know, Uganda really should be approaching this with that mindset. And there are a few things, you know, given that the oil development is proceeding, the ways in which Uganda could maximize these benefits. And one does pertain to this issue of jobs. And there is, you know, during construction, there can be more jobs for the local workforce normally than during operations. We know that, you know, during operations, as you noted, that it is probably going to be highly skilled foreign staff brought in for some of those roles. But there are other ways to really create jobs, and this is really along the supply chain and making sure that local companies are integrated into the supply chain of the oil development, and not just that they are capable of serving the oil project, but that they improve their capabilities and their competitiveness to serve other sectors also, as well as other countries in the region. And this will help these companies, but also the workforce that they employ survive the decline in oil in the future. Also, in terms of skilling the workforce to either take up jobs on the project or in the supply chain, it's important to make sure that these skills have value across other sectors, so that people's livelihoods would not be tied purely to the continued existence of the oil sector. It does also just raise the pressure on making sure that the finances today are managed very, very well, because if they're not going to be there tomorrow either. And so there's, you know, additional pressure on making the best use of the money that does come in today.
Right.
There's also, I guess, it's a bit of a mindset issue where Uganda really needs to be approaching this as a temporary boom, that they can't, you know, develop reliance on this oil sector or on oil revenues, but really invest as much as they can in other sectors, because it will be the other sectors and other revenue sources that carry Uganda through in the long term. Whether these benefits outweigh the cost of current development is really a big question.
I mean, Dickens, you don't have a lot of confidence in the sustainable planning of all of this to deal with, a potential drop in oil prices and then the future after, arguably, the supply of oil is no longer really there and providing the profits that the government hopes it will provide. There's also, Dickens, another issue with that. This is not just about Uganda. It was also supposed to be beneficial to Tanzania, as we said, and the DRC was also supposed to be allowed to transport its oil over to Uganda and out to the Tanzanian coast. And now many are concerned with the instability in the DRC actually increasing, especially if oil becomes more profitable in the region, across the border. And then that could cause more complications for Uganda as well. I mean, do you see that also being a regional problem?
Yes, as I indicated, already if you go to many of the communities that had been promised those opportunities of jobs, money to improve health services, education services, many of them have been disappointed. And these same communities have been now displaced from their communities. Government is using the judiciary to get eviction orders, demolition orders. So those who question are not even listened to. They are harassed by whatever means. So at the end of the day, it is going to depend on how the government and the companies are going to handle these questions. If people are not contented with what is going on, if the national debt is increasing and so it disables the government's capacity to provide social services, the regional problems are going to increase.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about that.
And Sarah, I mean, that's what I was alluding to is the cooperation that's going to happen across borders, especially with the situation that the DRC is in right now. Do you see that potentially, what's destabilized in the DRC causing also problems for Uganda because of what they're supposed to have in this energy cooperation?
I think definitely. I mean, it's the instability. Investors don't like instability. This really could bring concerns on their side in terms of continued involvement and investment in the project. But there are also other aspects around, skirmishes around the boundary disputes between DRC and Uganda, particularly, the division of Lake Albert itself. Those are likely to come to the fore again. I think we're also likely to see, I would say, the resentment that Dickens is alluding to with the displacement and the disruption of livelihoods as a result of the construction of the facilities, but also the pipeline, makes people susceptible to being recruited into rebel movements, being recruited into Islamic extremism groups, which is an issue in the region. And so there really is a security dimension here that is of vital importance. And this infrastructure is immovable. It makes it a very easy target for people who are unhappy with what is going on, and it does bring an extra, I would say, very strong incentive to those running the project to really try and get local communities on side, because people susceptible to joining rebel movements are going to be a very, very big problem for these investments.
So, Dickens, I mean, if you had the proverbial magic wand to control the development of Uganda's oil sector right now and make it work for Ugandan communities, potentially help manage whatever instabilities across the border by bringing the blessing of natural resources to the people, what would you do? How would you advise the government right now?
I think the first thing I would tell government, they need to be transparent in the processes of acquiring the land from people. They need to make people feel they are part of the process. They need to ensure that the grievance mechanisms, that when people are aggrieved, they can go to those committees, they can go to court and get justice in a timely manner. They need to ensure that all the neighbors who are likely to be affected by activities on Lake Albert, Machon Falls, Lake Victoria, they need to be involved in the whole of this process. And then they need to account for each and every revenue that is generated. As I have said, we've already collected around $1.1 billion from capital gains tax of oil. That is not little money for an economy like Uganda. And unfortunately, we haven't seen where this money is. And that all those will continue to cause people aggrieved, and people will continue questioning. So we need to start on a note that all Ugandans feel involved, feel that they are listened to, and those who are aggrieved can get justice.
Okay, Dickens Kamugisha and Sarah Logan, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank the two of you so much, sincerely, for being with us. Great to talk to you both, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.